Our scripture can be found in the bulletin. It comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Feel free to read along or listen along, whichever is your preference. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. May God add blessing and understanding to the hearing of these words this day. A couple of Ingersoll family stories. When I was in, second grade or so, we were having a school production. And at the school production, we were singing the opening hymn that we sang today, "We Three Kings." I was one of the kings. This was in that day when that separation of church and state thing, especially in the state of Oklahoma, was really not that big a deal. And so we could sing these kinds of songs. And so we were singing. It was the night before the performance. And I went to my mom and I was like, "Mom, I need a costume for tomorrow." I had an epiphany in that moment. Never tell your mom the night before you need a costume that you need a costume. She's a great seamstress, but she probably worked all night on that. The next morning, I was the sharpest dressed king singing, "We Three Kings of Orient are." It was a great experience, except for that night before part. I have an aunt. Well, had an aunt. She's passed. To me, she's Nana. To everyone else, she was Leona. And she would never be able to find her glasses. She would always be asking, "Where are my glasses? Have you seen my glasses?" And 90% of the time, they were on her head. And none of us would ever tell her because we just wanted to see how long it would take her to find her glasses. And the epiphany moment would come and she would be like, "Oh my God." That's just my aunt, my Nana. Where are my glasses? Where's my costume? Where's the child? The epiphanies that we have sometimes are day to day. Sometimes they're very big experiences like the kings had, the magi, the wise men, the astrologers. Epiphany comes in many forms. In the Christian world, it is the divine being coming present into the world. That's the epiphany. In regular day terms, it means becoming aware of something. Sometimes big things. Becoming aware. What would life be like for us if we asked the question every day, where is the child? What kind of epiphany moments might we have if every day we were seeking God in our lives? Well, if we're going to be like the Magi, what would come to us would be overwhelming joy. That's what we read. That's what we've been told. But can we know it? And can we know it on a daily basis? That's the goal. That is truly the goal. Now, there is a richness to the reading of this text. Probably things that we don't realize. That's why we have scholars. And that's why scholars will tell us so much about what happened. When the wise men come and ask that very simple question, where is the child who was born King of the Jews? We are told that King Herod is very afraid. Well, what we know is that King Herod is an appointed ruler. He is Roman. He is appointed by the Romans just to take care of this region of the world. He will get taxes paid to him, which he will forward on to the Romans while keeping a peace for himself. He's going to get wealthy by his leadership. He does not want to have another king. So he's worried. He's nervous. He's concerned for his livelihood. Maybe he doesn't want to lose any power. Doesn't want an uprising of those pesky people of Israel, those Jews. Let's just keep them under our feet, which is exactly what Rome wants anyway. But if you read carefully in the scripture, there's another piece to this. It says, all of Jerusalem is also scared. Why would the Jews be scared? Why would the people born to the city of David, the promised land, the promised people of God, why would they be scared that their Messiah has been born? Well, the interesting thing about the Gospel of Matthew is that it's written from the end. It's not written from the beginning. It is written with the end in mind. And the end is not Jesus being born, but Jesus being crucified. And so we know who the enemies of Jesus are as we read through the Gospel of Matthew. The Pharisees, the scribes, and the chief priests. All leadership within the church for the Jews. These are the ones who will tell you how to worship. These are the ones who will tell you what the laws are and how you're supposed to live these laws out in your life. These are the ones who will write down the stories and tell you what those stories are and how they fit you. They were the ministers, the elders, the leaders of the temple, the chief priests, the scribes, and the Pharisees. From chapter 2, they are mentioned as being scared of the birth of the Son of God. In this gospel. Not in all gospels, in this gospel. And so what does that mean? Well, they know that they will lose exactly what Herod will lose. The king will lose power. The church leaders will lose power. They will lose authority. They will lose respect if this Son of God comes in. Of course, this is Matthew writing with the end in mind. The Gospel of Matthew is written sometime around 70. Jesus dies somewhere in that 33 to 35 to 32 time period. No one really knows. But we have somewhere around 35 or 40 years of time that separates this writing from Jesus' death. Likely, the gospel writer wasn't even around much during Jesus' time. And so he's writing with the end in mind. The same way that we read the Gospels, we already know the end of the Gospel. We know what happens to this child who is born in a manger, who goes to the cross, and in between in that short 3-year ministry, teaches and preaches and heals. But he's destined for a cross. So for Jerusalem to be scared, we've got to already know the end. For Jerusalem, for the leaders of the temple to be scared already, to already in the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Matthew to be the enemies, they've got to know what Jesus is going to be about, what Jesus is going to do, and they're not going to believe in him. And they will work with Rome out of their fear to make sure that Jesus does not become the king that they expect him to, the warrior that will lead the people back. The other interesting part of this Epiphany Sunday is that the Magi are Gentiles. You know what Gentiles means, right? It just means anyone who's not Jewish. They aren't Jewish. They come from the east. They come from far away. They're not born and raised in Jerusalem. They don't understand necessarily all the teachings of the Jews. They have a sign, and they follow a star, and they go to see what it is. They're a mystical people. We may not understand that. We're not very mystical sometimes. We like our science. We like our technology. We like our gadgets. But these mystical soul searchers go to find the Son of God. They recognize Him already. Matthew is saying then, in this second chapter, that this one who was born in a humble way is for all people. Not just for the Jews. That's a message that we like very much, not being Jewish ourselves. It is a message that we like to be able to take out into the streets of our cities and towns. This one who is born, this God of us all, is for us all. And thanks be. Thanks be. We don't have to put people in boxes and separate, and we do that enough as it is. This is a unifying message found early in the Gospel of Matthew. Well, there's probably more that we could discuss and think about, but let's begin to ask ourselves, how does this make sense in our daily lives? I went to seminary at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. And as luck would have it, there's a very famous writer that went to school with me. He was a year older. I could beat him in ping pong. His name was Philip Gulley. And Phil and I have this shared heritage. He grew up in Danville, Indiana, and I served at Danville Christian Church in Danville, Indiana, and so we would talk all the time. I may have mentioned this to a few of you once before. In his newest book, The Evolution of Faith, he suggests that things have changed. We often like to say that God is the same always and never changing, but in his mind, whether it's God that's changed, the world that's changed, the church that's changed, changes have happened. Things have evolved. And God continues to try to work in our world and in our lives to make things better, even the church. He has a section in his book entitled On Good and Evil. And in that section, he has a remembrance of his mother-in-law. Her name is Ruby. He's entitled this part of his book, The Cycle of Life. Ruby has been independent, living on a farm in Indiana, and never needed anyone's help. Lived on her own for a good number of years. But the time had come. She was aging. And the adult children of Ruby said, it's time for you to move closer. You've got to move closer. In a brief amount of time, she was needing the kind of care that she had given to her children. You can understand what that means. Many of you have had aging parents. You get this really well. For those of us who have not had aging parents, you will get this. There's just this moment in life where the child becomes the parent and the parent becomes the child. As luck would have it, Ruby moved close enough for Phil and his wife to be able to visit her every day. When they would leave, she would say, "See you tomorrow." And she would, because they would come every day. And it was in those visits that his wife would begin to care for her mother. Now, this got Phil to thinking. It got him to thinking about his own life, where he had those times in his life where he was completely dependent on his parents as a child. And that as he got to 18 and graduating high school, he made a decision that he wanted to become independent. he put off college to go to work first. And so he worked, and after a few years, he had been able to save enough money to be able to get an apartment. So he moved out, and he was even less dependent on his parents after moving out than he had been before. Through the stages of life, he had come to being on his own. There were still conversations with his parents. There were still interactions with his parents. But waking up and going to bed and through his day was all on him. He says that his idea of God, his theology began to change a little bit at this time too. For in his younger years, he saw God as that all-powerful parent that took care of him in every moment. But as he moved into this new stage of life, he saw God more as a partner, saw God more as a friend, saw himself as less of a child. This was life-changing for him. He said that he began to see his faith as an opportunity to share responsibility and friendship with God and something less of a duty. And this connected him to God in a different way. I wonder what you think of these kinds of things. Is it possible that your own relationship with God has changed a little from the time that you were young to where you are now? Do you see God interacting in your life in a different way? Do you see yourself as child or friend? Maybe both. I'm not saying that he's right. I'm just saying he presents an interesting thought. That sometimes faith moves into new places for us. There is a book for small groups to study and to try to grow in their faith. It's called Soul Tending. It is by Kendra Creasy-Dean and Ron Foster. They are from Princeton. They are primarily in youth ministry, but this book is for more than just youth ministers. And it is divided into 3 parts. And all 3 of the parts are exactly the same taglines to try to guide you through the experiences that they're hoping that you'll find. But the hope is that people will grow in their spirituality by having these conversations. The first part of the book is called Tending In. And it's all about personal growth. It's about Bible study. It's about spiritual practices. It's about inward conversation. The second part of the book is called Tending Out. It's recognizing that there's more to this faith than just what's within. It's what's outside of us too. Seeing those in need. Some of the parts of this part of the book are like evangelizing, Bible study, different things that can be done for others, serving the needs of others. The last section is called Tending Together. I love this. Tending in, tending out, tending together. Recognizing that we are a community of believers. Recognizing that we have to build up ourselves, serve others, and come together to be able to most appropriately honor and worship and bless our God. That it takes all of those. The very last part of the book in that tending together is about being the church. It's about being the church. They quote an author from the 6th century. His name is Saint Dorotheus. And Saint Dorotheus says, imagine this. Take a compass, not one that you hold in your hand and follow directions, but a mathematical compass. You remember that tool where you point it right in the middle of the paper and then you can draw a perfect circle? I wonder if they even use those today in math class. He says, take a compass, draw the circle. Imagine that the circle is the world and that the point in the middle is God. And then draw lines through the circumference. The lines are the lives of people. And the further you go away from the center, the further away you go from God. And the more you come to the center, the closer you get with God. He suggests, in fact, that for those who live faithfully and follow in the ways of the Spirit, not only are we coming close to God, we come closer to each other. And when we sin, he doesn't use this language in his writing, St. Dorotheos, but it's basically what he means. He says when we turn away from God and we turn away from the things of faith, when we turn away from the Spirit, then we grow further away from each other. The closer to God, the closer we are to each other. The further away from God, the further away from each other. The goal of faith is obviously to be close to God. And to be close to God means we're going to be close to each other. You might ask me, what does this do with Epiphany Sunday? Well, to me, it's very simple. The same question that the Magi ask. And remember, there's no number of Magi in the story. We think 3 because of the gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But there's no number. We're not told how many actually made the trip. The Magi come and they ask the question, where is the child? If we ask that question on a daily basis, we will be tending in, tending out, and tending together. Because this question can be asked for us individually as well as for us as a church. May this be our goal this year, to tend in, to tend out, to tend together, to ask, where is the child? Because if we can do that, we will find joy. It is the gift of asking the question. It is the gift of taking the journey, just like the Magi. On this Epiphany Sunday, may it be so.